Hi, Kayla. Welcome to the Surthriving podcast. I'm so glad you're here.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Of course, I'm so glad we got to connect. I feel like I've just been kind of stalking you on social media, so thanks for agreeing to come on.
Of course. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. I start every episode with one question. You can answer it in any way you feel comfortable, and that is, are you surviving or thriving?
I think it depends on the day, the minute, the second that you ask me that. Right this second, I definitely am more on the thriving side of the spectrum. But if you would have asked me a week ago, I would have been like, I'm surviving, barely.
Yeah.
Here we are. So I think it really depends on the exact moment that you ask me these days.
Yeah, exactly. And I imagine that a lot of topics we'll dig into will kind of like help narrate that response a little bit. Okay, Kayla, so we're going to cover a bunch of different stuff, and I'm honestly so excited for this topic because I feel like sometimes these podcasts are almost like for me personally in a way. So I'm just really excited to talk about like navigating your 30s and surviving versus thriving and all of that. But to bring listeners up to speed on who Kayla is on and offline, can you just share a little bit about who you are, the work that you do, the content you create, and a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Kayla. I am a content creator and social media strategist based in New York City. As a content creator, I share a lot about being in your 30s, kind of navigating those ups and downs, the books I love, as well as being an introvert and trying to approach all of these things with a sense of honesty, but also sometimes a sense of humor. I also work full time as a social media manager at bookshop.org and previously was in the yoga and fitness space as an instructor.
So wide spectrum of things. Got your like hands in a little bit of all. And for anyone, I'll tell any listener that's made it this far listening, if you haven't followed Kayla already in your 30s or late 20s, and feeling a little bit lost and kind of maybe alone in your friend groups or your community, she definitely is really posting the real the real of navigating your 30s and this like weird phase that people are in. But you mentioned that you were in the yoga and fitness studio. Can you just talk about that career change and what led you there?
Totally. So my career has been really all over the place, is the truth of it. That I was a theater major undergrad, which means I graduated with no job prospects because what do you do with a theater degree? Not much, unfortunately. And I ended up in the marketing world, but had originally wanted to be a fitness instructor and kind of struggled to get that career off the ground. Flash forward a couple of years, I lost my job in marketing and decided, you know what, I've been still wanting to do this and explore this fitness thing. So I gave it another chance and ended up getting hired as a yoga teacher and a bar instructor at two amazing studios here in New York City. And through the course of about 2 years, started building up my schedule from maybe like 6 classes a week to eventually I had 16 permanent classes a week. And that's where I was at in March 2020 when studios shut down due to the pandemic. And unfortunately left me unemployed and not really knowing where to go next. And then when studios reopened, I at that point was just so exhausted from teaching and just knew I couldn't go back to what I was previously doing. So eventually decided to pivot back to the marketing world where I'd previously been.
Wow, yeah, that is definitely crazy having like a full set of classes. I work part-time actually like in a bar studio, and so just like from seeing the instructors like teaching a lot, it's exhausting, and I think people underestimate the commitment and the choreo that goes into it and the music and playlists and really being able to like hold a room and really being that energetic person for the clients that come in who have had a hard day at work or have had a hard day at home and really want a reprieve. And what if you're just having the surviving day too? They're looking to the instructor to really like help them thrive literally and get a good workout in. So kudos to you.
Oh yeah. And it's truly a hustle as far as having enough classes to teach per week if you want it to be your full-time job, that it's this really fine balance of teaching enough classes that you're making enough money, but then also not totally burning yourself out. And it's hard to find that balance. That the industry does not make it easy to be your full-time job, that's for sure.
What was that transition like going back to the 9 to 5, especially after pandemic?
I will admit that I went kicking and screaming, is the truth of it. I did not want to go back to a 9 to 5 job. I was not thrilled about it at the time. I kind of felt like a failure, which is a sad thing to say. But I think now that I have a lot more distance from it, it's really realizing that it was the industry that failed me. It was not my ability as an instructor, but more so just how impossible the structure of how the fitness industry works just made it impossible. And I think for me, it eventually ended up being the right choice and truly one of the best choices that it could have made for me as far as being able to really enjoy my life again. I think when I was trying to make going back to teaching work when studios open back up, I remember that first summer just feeling like I did not enjoy my summer at all. I was so busy teaching. I was so tired. I was just so burnt out that I didn't have my life or anything besides the teaching and going back to a 9 to 5 job. I remember taking my first like vacation on PTO and I just was like, so you just are going to pay me while I'm here on the beach? Like, you sure? Like the paycheck's still going to come in. Like, I don't need to get these classes covered. Benefits, having health insurance was, it's sad to say, but not a thing in the fitness world. So for me, it ended up being the right choice and the right transition back into that world.
Yeah, and there's two sides to, I think, every decision. A lot of people I think we're seeing online are doing content creation or the influencing, whatever word you want to tie it to. But there's downsides to that too. You don't have PTO. You have to own your own schedule or someone owns it for you, like a PR or publicist. But in a 9 to 5, you have a stable income. You're paid bi-weekly. You have PTO where you get paid to sit on the beach and don't have to worry about people like really covering for you to the level of fitness instruction would really like have you be responsible for.
For sure.
And so for anyone that works from home, works a 9 to 5, because I know that you're fully remote, and is experiencing any feelings of like loneliness or like surviving for the purpose of the episode, what advice would you give them to help them thrive in that like setup?
There's a few things that I feel have really worked for me. I will say, for starters, I do love working from home. Everyone has their opinions on it. I'm an introvert. I love being home. I love being in my space. I love not having to feel rushed in the morning to like get ready and be at a desk at a certain time. So I think for me, in many ways, I personally love it, as I'm not someone who craves that interaction per se. But some of the things that have really helped me, one is every morning I leave my apartment to go work out and I take a group fitness class. Either I'm still a member of the bar studio where I used to teach. I still really love the community there. And then I also joined another gym that has a really strong emphasis on community. Because for me, the thing I really noticed was there was a lot of mornings when I first started my new job that I was just working out at home. I was still doing like Zoom classes that one of my studios was offering and like at my Peloton bike. And while that was great and moving my body felt good, I just felt like when I like sat down to work and did a full work day home without interacting with anyone in person, I was just like, wow, I like have felt like I'm just like in my own bubble for this whole day. And the only person I maybe have seen is my doorman downstairs when I left to go get coffee or something.
Yeah.
And having the rule for myself of if it's a work day, I am leaving my apartment first thing in the morning to go work out. It means that I know I will interact and see people at some point during the day. And I think that has just boosted my overall mood and productivity as well. My other big thing is what I call my fake commute. At the end of the day, 5 o'clock, close my laptop. I get out the door no matter what. I get out the door. Maybe sometimes I'm only walking a few blocks if it's really cold, as it is right now in New York City. I try to push to do more of a walk than that. And I think for me, it's a really good part of separating my work here, my office here from my like life here. And when I get home, it means like we're not working anymore. We're not checking anything related to that job, and we're transitioning into the life part of my evening, whether that's making dinner or cleaning up around the apartment or watching TV, reading, whatever that thing is. So I think that has really helped me kind of separate the work from the life in my apartment. And once again, just like getting outside and interacting with the world, even if it's not necessarily a super social outing.
Yeah, it's so important. You covered really important things that I think women in their 30s are starting to navigate, prioritizing your health and wellness, getting outside, finding community, whatever that looks like for that person, interacting with people, but then also prioritizing alone time, self-recovery, your own inner wellness, whether that's journaling, reading, like whatever someone likes. And it's funny that you work from home full time and like love it and thrive in it and say you're an introvert. I also work from home, fully remote, a 9 to 5, but I would identify myself as an extrovert. And when you started posting about the fake commute, I was like, you don't have to like go
No,
anywhere.
I go
We're not
nowhere.
like commuting anywhere.
I find
Yeah, you're not going anywhere. Like you don't have to go to shop,
it's
right?
usually
You just
like
walk 5 blocks.
I like to go like window shopping, I'll call it. That sometimes I'll just like think of a store that I haven't like window shopped at in a while and I'll walk to there. I feel like everyone has, or maybe not everyone, I definitely have my like routes that I typically walk of like, okay, we have like the one version of the walk and the other version of the walk if I want to go up or down, depending. And for me, it's just, it's usually going somewhere without a purpose, or if it is a purpose, it's window shopping somewhere that I think I just want to see what they have today.
Yeah, going somewhere without a purpose. I love that. And so important in learning how to thrive in surviving moments, that not everything has to have an end goal. It sounds, so small, like the fake commute, but it really is important. And we're living in a world now where people are moving at 500 miles a minute. Everyone's in a different life stage, even though we're all like the same age. 900 things are happening around us, but it's really important to take like intentional time. I feel like that's what I really heard when you were saying that. It's just really intentional, and that's important to you. So kudos. And I'm going to have to start adopting the fake commute because it's funny, as an extrovert, I like succumb to like the work from home. Like I've like not left my apartment for like 3 days before, 4 days, sometimes in the winter. Like
it's like you have to make the effort. It's so true though.
Yeah.
You really do.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's really just being intentional and consistent. Really important. And any listener, consider adopting the fake commute. Trademarked, Kayla.
It's funny. I for me really do notice the difference between the days when I do leave my apartment, even like during the day between the hours of 9 to 5, whether it's to like quickly go grocery shopping, go get coffee outside of my apartment, or just like walk around the block. And it's funny, certain days it'll be 5 o'clock and I'll log off and be like, man, I'm just like in a mood. And then I'm like, well, yeah, you've just been here all day. Like, no wonder you're not feeling great. You've just been in the same space and staring at a computer and answering Slack messages all day. Obviously, you're not feeling great.
I had mentioned earlier, being in our 30s, everyone's moving 900 miles a minute. We have friends, and I know you've openly posted about this, friends getting married, friends in relationships, the weddings, friends moving to out of state, taking trains, planes, and buses to celebrate people. As a 30-something as well, what's your viewpoint on like the feeling behind feeling that we often experience? Because I will tell you right now that I definitely do have that feeling sometimes.
It's something I've been thinking about a lot because I think it's something a lot of us are feeling. And it's funny because for me, I was never someone that I didn't want to get married by the time I was 30. That was not a goal of mine whatsoever. And I was in a serious relationship for all of my 20s. And that was not the goal for me to like check this off by the time I hit 30. But then there was this weird thing that I turned 30 and I looked around me and was like, wow, I'm the only one not married in groups. And we had spent so much of our life kind of hitting the same milestones at the same time, as far as first kisses, graduating high school, going to college, getting our first jobs and all that stuff. I think for me, something that has really helped is shifting my mindset towards it. I am not a patient person. I do not like to wait, and I want it all and I want it now. And something that's really helped me is just reminding myself that like it really is a marathon and not a sprint. And it's so easy to say that. And I think we hear so much that like life is short, and I do agree with that sentiment and why people say that. But I also think we have to remember that life is also really freaking long, that like just because you don't hit a certain checkpoint that you think you need to be hitting by a certain age, one, it doesn't mean it's not happening. And two, it's kind of like, wait, what's the rush? Like, I'm 30 years old. I'm not 30 years old. I'm 33 years old. I'm like, how old am I? I'm 33 years old. I'm in my 30s. That's what I meant. And just this idea that like, there's still so much life left to go. And just because I didn't get there yet doesn't mean it's not coming for me. And it's not happening. And then also just even thinking about like all of these great things that happen because of it. And I do think to some extent the grass is always greener on the other side to some extent. That I've definitely had some of my married friends making the comment of like, oh, it must be nice to just be like making decisions for yourself and like do
Yeah.
whatever you want when you want to do it. And I'm like, yeah, it like we all have that thing that we look to the other side, whatever that other side is, that we think it's better, nicer, more amazing, when it's like, no, like we all have the ups and downs of wherever we're at. And like, why am I in such a rush to get somewhere that when there's so much time left, essentially?
Yeah, and it is the marathon thing. Like a marathon is 26 whatever miles for a reason. And like people do 5Ks and 10Ks and half marathons for a reason to build up to that. And so that's just like an analogy that I pulled out of the sky. But like, you know what I
It's
mean? There's
pacing
a
yourself, yeah.
reason. Yeah,
If
like
you go
there's a
out
reason.
fast, you're gonna burn out.
Yeah, exactly. And I think something that I've been reflecting on since turning 30, I'll be 31 in April, is that so much of our life is structured for us. Like we go to elementary school, middle school, high school, college. We all graduate around the same time. You're anywhere from like 20 to 23. And then from there, pretty much everyone that I know got a full-time job. So it's like everyone is interviewing and applying and getting full-time jobs and living at home for maybe a year or two. And then you still have a full-time job, but now everyone moves out and you have roommates. And so even though there's not like structured things like, oh, I finished college in 4 years, like everyone around me, there's still like loose guidelines of kind of like what you think you're supposed to be doing. And a good example is I was the first person in a friend group from college to get my master's degree. And while they were doing that, like while I was doing that, I was living in a new city. I moved away from home with a random roommate from Michigan and was getting a master's degree in something I was really passionate about. And they were all living back up here with roommates or their parents having full-time jobs, like going out to the bars, and didn't have to do graduate work on a Friday night. And so there's both sides to every story, and there's a choice to every, there's reflection on every choice that you make. But it is really hard to like not feel that you're measuring up to the people around you, or just like that feeling behind can really bring like a lot of loneliness. So solidarity in that, and solidarity to like anyone listening, you're not alone. Like there's people like Kayla and I out there who like you can just thrive where you're at, and whatever that means for you, if that's joining a new gym or getting a different job or moving to a new city and going out and making new friends who are in a similar life phase. I think that's something that's been really important to me, is finding people who are in similar phases. And even if there's friends who are not, being like intentional in conversations and say like, well, this is like what's going on in my life, and bringing them up to speed, because any good friend will meet you halfway and say, hey, how's your podcast going? How's your content creation going? Like, how's your partnership with the content that you're making, or whatever it is, and that it will show who your good friends are. Unfortunately, like you probably will lose a lot of friends when you're not in the same phase of life, and that's something that we can touch on too. But it's hard, and it's just like that growth that can really feel like pain sometimes.
For sure, for sure.
To any listener who is like struggling with navigating their 30s, whatever that looks like for them, what advice would you give them? You kind of touch on it a bit, like a little bit, but what advice would you give them who someone is really just trying to like survive, and they feel behind, and they really want to be this like happy person and enjoy where they're at and be intentional? Like what advice would you give them?
I think my easy advice is therapy, if I'm going to be very honest, as far as
Oh yeah.
giving someone perspective and really kind of working on that idea of being present, and instead of thinking so much about the next step, the next step, the next step, enjoying where you're at as well. I think for me, that's been one of the important things, as someone, like I said, who is not patient by nature and is always thinking about 5 steps ahead of where I currently am, and cannot sit in success for more than 2 seconds before thinking about the next big goal. I think connecting with other people who are in a similar stage, whether it's following content creators that are in that stage, making new friends, whether that's through things like working out. I think in New York City, we have so many great intramural sports teams, if that's your thing, or I think when people always ask, like, how do you make new friends? I think just being a regular somewhere, anywhere is really one of the things for me. So many of like the random connections and people that I've met along the way living here have been from activities that I've been a regular at. So like in college, I was really into flying trapeze, which is my like weird hobby, and like seeing the same people every week at the same class, those people became my friends and my community. And it might not happen immediately. They might not become your best friends, but those are great ways to just start to meet people, whether it's that they're at the same stage as you, or maybe just even have a common interest with you. And that can be the thing that like is comforting and provides you with that like sense of community.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And I think that there's this narrative that's put out that it's so hard to make friends as an adult. I actually really disagree with that. I think that if you're just like yourself and, like you said, a regular somewhere and look inward of what you enjoy, you'll find people who are like you, who are in similar stages. And I mentioned it earlier, but like I work part time at a fitness studio, and that
That's
was
like one
really
of the best ways
partially.
to make new friends.
Oh, yeah, I love those
I
girls.
worked
Yeah.
front desk at, that was my first job out of college, was front desk at a fitness studio. And I also did that to like help supplement my income when I was starting to teach. And you will just like meet people and talk to people. And whether it's like your coworkers or the people that come in the studio, like I was in the wedding of someone who used to go to the spin studio that I worked at when I was
Wow.
23 years old. Like I was in her wedding party. And I sometimes forget that we met because she was a client at that fitness studio where I was front desk, and we connected and stayed in touch and became very good friends over the years.
That's amazing. And what a perfect example of just like putting yourself out there, and that to really like it almost feels like dating, but like make the first move. Like it's okay to like ask someone like, hey, like I see you at this class at 6 o'clock every day. Like where do you live? And then figure out, maybe your close neighbors, whatever, like, oh, there's this new coffee shop. Like you just have to like ask and like put yourself out there, and be okay if someone's, maybe dismisses it. Okay, fine. Then like they weren't meant to be your friend or acquaintance anyways. So I went and got a front desk job, and now sometimes we do wine nights, we go out to dinner, we go in the city, and even if it's not just that, working from home, back to our like conversation earlier, I'm now interacting and I'm getting that like co-worker experience with clients too. So as we talked about, Kayla, our 30s are surviving and thriving in their own buckets. As a woman in your 30s, what way have you survived versus thrived since your 20s?
It's been all over the place, as I said earlier, and just high. The highs have been high, the lows have been low. I am of the lucky age that I turned 30 in May 2020, so it was
Oh my gosh.
truly the worst of times, for lack of a better term. And I think I feel like my 20s had been like a really nice like upward climb of like, yeah, we like had some dips and some things, but like right before the pandemic, I felt like I had reached this really exciting place in my career as a fitness instructor, that I had actually just left my front desk job because I was able to make enough income from just teaching, and that felt really exciting. And then obviously it all went away, and that kind of felt like I was just totally wiping the slate clean and just starting over at zero. As I said, I was like newly out of a relationship, so it was just kind of like turning 30, just feeling like all of these things that had been building up and getting to that thriving point just all went away. So in many ways, the last 3.5 years have definitely been kind of rebuilding and coming back to that space, which I'm sure is true for so many of us, whatever age you were when the pandemic started and how that affected your life. I think for me, I am starting to get back to that pace of thriving, whether it's between my career and even just like my overall health and well-being, that I think the last year I've really focused on building the community, and also like really like fostering the friendships that I already had as well, and kind of not throwing them out thinking that automatically they're not worth my time and effort just because we're maybe in different life stages or our friendships look different now. So I think in the last year, it's really been like doing the building blocks to get back to the like true thriving. That was definitely my 2023, was like kind of doing those like not as fun, like, but necessary things
Yeah.
to like get to that place of thriving. Because I think it's not always fun. It's not always sexy. It's not always all like cute aesthetic Instagram reels and fun stories. But sometimes it's just like doing the really intense internal work. It's working on your mental health. It's doing the awkward friend things to like try to recultivate those relationships and being honest about where you're at and what you want and all of that stuff. So I think it's like, I feel a big focus of this year has definitely been like, okay, like we were down for a while, but now we're like on the up and up and like doing the necessary things to get to that thriving place.
Yeah, 100%. And have you heard or like read the articles about COVID skip year?
Yes, that was for a while. That was like a big dinner topic whenever I would go out with like girlfriends of mine.
Yeah.
So the idea of it is like the pandemic skip was like we skipped over a bunch of ages. It was a New York Magazine article, I believe is where it lived. And kind of this feeling of like I went from being 29 to now I'm 33, almost 34, and feeling like I just totally lost those years. And I think what was so interesting was my friends, depending on their life, had such strongly different opinions of like anyone who, depending on their career and their relationship, some of them were like, nah, like I don't really feel that or think that. And then there's me who's like, what happened? Like, where did all of that go? And just like feeling like I'm doing really well for a 29-year-old, but like, I'm like, ooh, you're a lot older than you think you are. And therefore it feels different knowing that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have one friend from high school. We've been friends for like what feels like 20 years now. We talk about it all the time. Like she just had her 30th birthday party in the fall, and we were like, this just like feels weird. Not only because we've been friends since literally 2011, but also because we think that everything just like blacked out for a couple of years. I personally, like to your point, feel it, and like I think I'm coming out of that and like probably don't as much anymore, but I definitely like did. Like for a while I was like, no, I'm literally 27 because there's things that I didn't get to do or travel or stuff like that. And it's hard. Like you feel like you lose a lot of opportunities and chances to do things and access to people and stuff like that. It can only feed into that like feeling behind feeling of like navigating now our 30s that we talk about. It's because, well, the world just like disappeared for 3 years.
Totally.
Like how else are we going to feel?
And like I said, I think depending on what was happening in your life definitely like changes how it was felt. I think for me, like my married friends feel so much older than me, which is a weird thing to say, but I think because like during that time, so many of them left the city and moved to the suburbs, maybe sooner than they were planning on it. And they're having children or trying to have children. And it feels like because of the exact timing of the pandemic, like my life was just stopped, like at a total standstill, and theirs kept going. And it's kind of this weird, like they kept moving. And like, I think for a lot of us potentially felt stuck because of not being able to move forward depending on what was going on in our life. So I feel like that's also created like a very interesting divide in like my particular age bracket of depending on like, for me, it's like, yeah, my career couldn't advance because it didn't exist for over a year essentially. And then when I came back, it was very different.
Yeah, exactly. And we've talked a lot about like friends. How have your friendships and overall just like lifestyle changed? How have you navigated being in a different phase than your friends?
I think for me, I've had to shift how I look at friendships of kind of friends that left the city and mourning that like it's no longer easy to just see them. I'm not getting the phone call of like, hey, are you home? I'm like outside your building. Can I come up for a second just to say hi? It's really shitty that like that no longer exists, but then feeling grateful that like, oh, what does exist is now when I go to visit my friend in New Jersey at her house, like we spend this whole day together and it feels like this really special day, or we like have a sleepover and we get to have like this extended time together. And then like another friend became my like, I call him my everything friend. Like I make him run errands with me. We just sit on the couch and watch TV together a lot. We don't necessarily have plans always. It's just like lazy hangouts, essentially, my
Yeah.
couch friend, as I call it on social media. And I think just like acknowledging that like the friendships are going to look different and evolve and shift, but that doesn't have to be totally a bad thing. And it doesn't mean that these friendships are no longer important or valid, even if they look different. Like this person from my childhood can still be my best friend, even if
Yeah.
I'm not seeing them as much or talking to them as much, because we're no longer literally location wise as close. But that doesn't mean like we don't still deeply care about each other and have the most amazing day when we do get to see each other.
Yeah, and I'll add that for me personally, a lot of it was not lowering expectations, it was just changing them. And so
Yeah.
something that has been like really healthy practice, and I encourage anyone listening who is having a hard time navigating friendship in your 30s because you're in different stages, is to just shift your expectations. There's two parts to my answer. Shift expectations and learn how to thrive in being alone. And
Yeah.
so the first one being, okay, if all of your friends are in relationships or have homes in the suburbs, maybe they're not going to be the friend that go to a concert with you at Madison Square Garden on a random Friday night. Just shifting your expectation that maybe their time that they're prioritizing looks a little bit different because they're planning a wedding, of like a very like high stressful career, or traveling a lot for work, or buying a house or remodeling a house or having kids, someone's pregnant. I think the shift that's healthy is not saying like, oh, they don't want to be my friend. It's just, it looks different. And so,
Mm-hmm.
like I said before, the friend that maybe used to go out with you to the bars might not do that anymore as much. And they're not going to be the friend that you text on a Friday night. Maybe you have to make new friends to be able to do that. And the other part that I was saying is, and I know you've just covered content on this, so I would like love to pick your brain, is just learning how to thrive in being alone. It's probably like the best thing that I've done in my late 20s and early 30s, is absolutely just like loving being with myself. Now being older, I love being alone. Maybe sometimes a little bit too much. That's something we can work on. But like doing the random life things, or saying like, hey, there's this free event happening in New York City, I'm going to go alone. Or I know you were just covered going to concerts alone. I started going to concerts alone and I've thrived.
Yeah.
So can you share a little bit about like the work and intention that you've put towards like learning how to really be okay with like being alone, like not lonely, just being alone?
I think so much is in that shift of reminding yourself that just because you're alone doesn't mean it has to automatically mean lonely. I feel grateful I went to college in New York City, and I think because of that I was really forced to spend a lot of time alone, just whether for college I was being sent to go see this show and my schedule didn't line up with other people's schedules. I'd have to go see it alone. And something that I think really helps is remembering like no one cares. Like if
Yeah.
people are, I think there's this weird like thought that like people are staring at you and like judging you, and they're not. And if for some weird reason they are, it really just says more about them and their discomfort with themselves. I just shared the story in a caption that I posted that I went on my first big solo trip last summer. I went to London for a week. I really wanted to go see Harry Styles at Wembley Stadium. I'd asked a couple of friends, and either it just wouldn't work out or financially it just didn't make sense for them. And I was kind of like, you know what? I would rather go on my own, one, than like go with a friend that I don't really
Yeah.
jive with or wouldn't care about this and would maybe not be enjoying the experience to the same level that I am. So I went on my own, and in the cab ride from the airport to my hotel, the cab driver was like, oh, are you meeting up with someone? I said yes, because safety.
Yeah.
I'm a New Yorker still. I was
Yeah.
not about to be like,
every woman ever.
I was like, yeah, I'm meeting up with someone. And then he went on this like long monologue about like, that's like good. I'm so happy for you. I could never travel alone and be so lonely, be so this.
Oh, wow.
And I just remember thinking, I feel really sorry for him that he doesn't feel comfortable enough with himself to spend that time alone and to luxuriate in the things that he enjoys. I think for me, when I was in London, it was so awesome to wake up and be like, what do I feel like doing today? I don't know. I'm going to like go wander to a bookstore and then see where the day takes me and go see Harry Styles at Wembley Stadium at night. And it'll be a great day.
Yeah.
And I think it's a muscle, like any muscle. It's something that you need to sometimes work on and strengthen and stretch and be okay with it being maybe a little uncomfortable or a little bit weak at first, but the more you do it, the less awkward and uncomfortable you'll feel. And I know you'll be like pleasantly surprised as well of one, how lovely people usually are. I went to another Harry Styles concert on my own in the pit, and all these people, I didn't even care. I was happy to be there on my own, and people were like, "Oh, are you on your own? Like, you can like come hang out with us." Like, they adopted me essentially, and it was like the sweetest thing ever. And you'll just be pleasantly surprised of like, I'm not extroverted, but sometimes it does force me to like chat with the person sitting next to me if I'm seeing theater, and have a lovely conversation with an old lady who I would sit next to during a matinee of some random Broadway show. And yeah, it really all comes down to that shift of alone, not lonely, and cultivating that muscle essentially of being okay with that time.
Yeah, that's such a good analogy. It really is a muscle because it feels awkward at first. It feels scary. And anyone listening, that anxiety that you think everyone is staring at you, the anxiety on your shoulder is lying to you. Nobody is. I can't even tell you like the amount of things that I've done alone, and I don't even remember like who was standing next to me like the next week. Like, so it literally does not matter. Go to the museum alone, go to the concert alone, go shopping alone. And everything that you do alone will get easier, but then also it can foster a source of control in your life. And I think that's really important in your 30s because it can bring a lot of clarity in what you want. And so if you don't have people who are maybe meeting you halfway with activities or phases and stages in life, it can really bring a lot of self-awareness, I think, doing things alone of how you feel. Okay, maybe not everyone wants to travel to London alone. Maybe they do it and it's too anxiety provoking and they really would have rather gone with a sibling or something like that. Now you know that, and it just can build self-awareness, and that's really important in your 30s, especially. I think in your 20s, I've mentioned this before on the podcast, that I was just like shooting off the side of my hip. Like, I turned where the wind blew, and I had so much fun. I had so much fun, but I also had so much anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And now I've really been cultivating the importance of self-intention and self-awareness and health and wellness and my mental health, and doing things that I like, and that you don't have to say yes to every invite. Learning how to say no is really important. And so learning how to say no is also flexing a muscle, like we've talked about.
Totally. It's funny you say that. One of the biggest takeaways for me when I did my big solo trip was it's really just such an exercise in listening to your intuition and checking in with yourself, of waking up and saying, okay, what do I want to do today? Pause. What do I really want to do today?
Yeah.
There's no one else's opinion and thoughts and 2 cents coloring it. And that can definitely be very freeing as far as spending the day exactly how you want it. It can also be anxiety provoking or just exhausting to say, I would just love for someone to tell me where we should go to dinner. That's not me, essentially. But I really do think that being okay with yourself and that alone time does cultivate a real sense of intuition, because if you can pause and listen and think when you're traveling on your own, or when you're thinking about going to a concert, or how you want to spend a Saturday that you have no plans, think about how much you're able to tap into that intuition for the bigger moments, the life decisions, the big things that you want to say yes or no to. So I love that you like brought that up, because it reminds me exactly of my big takeaway when I got back from London.
Yeah, it's so important too. And you mentioned something that brings up another question I want to ask. So if Kayla has no plans on a Saturday, it's nice outside, how is Kayla spending it?
How am I? Ooh, that sounds dreamy. I'm like, it's like a nice weather Saturday. Okay, I'm waking up. I'm going to go take a bar class. I'm going to pick up brunch from my favorite spot, La Palapa, on my way home. Going to eat at home. I'm like, I'd say I'd shower, but that's a lie. I'm just going to like get changed because it was a bar class. So it wasn't that sweaty. If it's nice out, then I'm going for a nice long walk. And then on the way back, I feel very fortunate that my parents have an apartment in the city and it has a pool on the rooftop. So I'm heading to the pool with a book, and I'm going to alternate for the next however many hours till it gets dark between reading and jumping in the pool and going back and forth. And I've become friendly with the community of pool people. They're mostly
I love that.
ladies in their 70s up to their late 90s.
Wow.
So they become my summer besties, essentially. So it's a perfect day of like some alone time, some doing stuff on my own, and then also like socializing, being like alone with others is how I think of it. That like maybe I'm not chatting with them a ton, but like I'm there and I can like be part of the conversation if I want to be.
Yeah. And first of all, that sounds like a really fun day. I love that. Can you just share a little bit about the content creation journey and how has that journey been, and how did it even like get started with like creating this community of just navigating your 30s and learning how to like be alone and self-empowerment?
I joke that it has been a lot like a long road to being an overnight sensation, essentially. I started my blog, so an actual blog, back in 2011 when I was still in college, as a way to share my fitness journey and connect with others and really feel less alone in that fitness journey. And then that eventually became social media as Instagram became more and more of a thing. And I've always kept that social media presence, and it's kind of evolved with me depending on what's going on in my life. And over the last year or so, I started to just tap into those thoughts and things that I was talking about with my friends over dinner or thinking about that I didn't feel other people were necessarily sharing on the internet, or maybe not sharing super loudly. So
Yeah.
those thoughts on feeling lost in your 30s, because I think there's a lot of talk about being lost in your 20s, but then this weird expectation that you're supposed to have it all figured out, which I don't think is true or actually realistic necessarily.
Yeah.
And I started to just share and have fun with the content and just share in a way that felt really natural to me, like sharing these honest thoughts and things that maybe would have been a blog post 13 years ago, back when I was doing more blogging, but how do I distill it into content? And the first video had gone really viral. It was kind of a year ago exactly, on being single in your 30s and kind of the duality of both being like, you can both really love your life and really love aspects of it. For me, that was living alone and deciding what I want to do with my day and decorating my apartment however I want to. But then also that like wishing there was someone else to enjoy all of this with you and be a part of it with you. And wow, did that go very viral, and just followers started coming in, and it definitely made me realize I had tapped into something. And from there, just kind of continuing to experiment with the kind of things I was sharing, and then also how I was sharing it. Yeah, in the last year, the growth has truly been mind-blowing, that in a way that I thought I was going to be stuck at 18K for the rest of my life, and then seeing the following go up, up, up. And I think just really realizing that there are so many people thinking and feeling the same things that you are. Sometimes it's just a matter of vocalizing it and saying it to realize that there are other people out there thinking those same things and feeling that same way.
Yeah, absolutely. And the content that you've posted is insightful and honest and vulnerable and relatable. I sometimes catch myself in the comments of your posts and your reels and stuff, and they're like, sometimes I'm like reading a comment that I would write myself, and it just really shows that people are out there who are like you and feel the same way. And I've mentioned it a bunch, but that's also something I'm trying to get across like in this podcast is, you said like there's parts of your life that you might love, that you're thriving in, and then there's parts of your life that you feel like you're surviving in. I'm experiencing both quite literally like in my life right now, and that is normal and that's human. No one has it all together. This has been such a good conversation. Any last words of wisdom or insight for our listeners?
I guess just wrapping it all up, the recurring theme seems to be just this reminder that you're not alone in your feelings, and chances are other people are feeling this as well. And I hope you find that idea comforting, in that you're not alone in feeling the feelings that you are experiencing. And you might be like quite literally alone sometimes, but that doesn't mean it has to be a lonely situation.
Kayla, thank you so much again for taking the time to come on the Surthriving podcast. I loved this conversation and can't wait for listeners to enjoy it. I really appreciate it, and thank you again.
Thanks for having me.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Surthriving. I hope you took some helpful information away from it and are feeling inspired. If you know someone who is surviving or thriving and would benefit from hearing this episode, feel free to send it over to them. Remember, sharing is caring. To leave a review or rating of the show, head to Spotify to follow, rate, and let me know what you think. All information about today's episode, guest, and podcast social handles will be in the description, so don't forget to follow us on social media to stay up to date.